start with you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me this evening to talk to you all. My name is Linda Vega. I am a Texan, a Tejana, as I like to say. I was born and raised in South Texas, born in a little town of Westlaco, Texas, close by the border. I am the youngest of 9. My parents grew up in that area and raised all of us. We initially were 10 and ended up at 9. I am the youngest, and drilled into our everyday life activity that education was the important key to success. So all of us have graduated from college and we're professionals. I am the youngest. I attended the University of Texas at Austin, graduated from there, went on to law school in Washington, D.C. I briefly worked, interned at the World Bank, and I worked at AFSA in the State Department for a while. I lived in Europe for 2 years and then returned to the United States and eventually made my way back to Texas, where I worked for the Department of Labor for a few years and then went off to start my own law firm in Houston. I initially started to practice in the area of business immigration, not practicing in the Department of Labor area because I was told for 2 years I could not pursue those cases, which is fine. I believe in capitalism to the full extent in that we make our own destiny, we create our own destiny, and which is why I thought that having my own business, my own law firm, I wanted to be part of that American dream. And I've not regretted it since 2005 when I opened my doors. It has been a wonderful learning experience, but something I wouldn't change. I then started an organization called Latinos Ready to Vote, where I wanted to go into the community to talk to people who didn't know that they were conservative, to talk to them about conservative values. Because the more that I learned about being in the process in the community, where I'd go do some volunteer work at church, and people, number one, they were not interested in voting. Number two, they were not interested in hearing about conservative values. And so I wanted to change that, and I started this organization since 2005, going in and talking to people. That is in and of itself a difficult task, but eventually we made some headway. To talk to people about the Constitution, to talk to people about what's important and why is it that they are here in the United States for the same reason that you and I are here, to take full advantage of that American dream. And eventually we made headway, and people started to become more aware of family values, economic trends, becoming entrepreneurs. But most of all, a lot of them never realized how much taxes they were paying, whether it's local, state, or federal. Had no idea. And it dawned on me that, we have a growing demographic in Texas, changing demographic in Texas, and they don't have a clue as to what the process of economics is in the United States. And so we have developed a point where we encourage people to become U.S. citizens, but also to take part of that, become entrepreneurs, learn about it from the point of view of owning their own business, becoming self-sufficient. And it's taken a while, but we have made headway. So I started to get involved more and more in the policy process of certain things, of property taxes, immigration, things that really were affecting Texas. And then I started to look at Washington, and I saw gridlock, and I saw nothing being done. And I encouraged other people to run, which they didn't, and I thought, we need to make a change. We need to bring about something to not only the Republican Party, but to save America in the way that it was going. We were creating this culture of dependency, not just on entitlements, but on just the lack of information that was out there. And so the concept of limited government, where the government doesn't intrude into our lives with every single law that is passed, whether it's a search and seizure with the Fourth Amendment with the NSA, whether it's taxation because it's cloaked under Obamacare in healthcare, whether it's something else that deprives us of our liberty. I thought we need people to stand up and do something, because it's as though our liberties were being eroded at the same time that laws were being created. And the government is growing, and people are not aware as to how much our liberty is at stake. And, you know, nowadays, I have clients who are US citizens who are being detained. And my business has grown so much in that area that people are unaware as to why they're being detained, why they can't seem to have counsel. And I think that is the scariest part of our government now. We have no voice. And we keep voting in the same people, and we are allowing this to happen. We as constituents, to just go for the sake of name recognition, or because that person has a war chest of 7 million, without really talking to them and saying, you promised me you wouldn't pass that law. You fly back to Washington and you pass that law. Not only that, you meet with special interest groups. And so it dawned on me that Washington's broken. They have failed in every which way, but we keep allowing them to fail by sending the same people there. So we need to really go up there, protect the Constitution, protect Texans, and protect our civil liberties. And we need to do this not just by giving to their war chest, but by actually using our vote to make a stand and say, no more. To that point that you can go up to Washington, you can promise us anything that you want just to garner that vote. But when in fact you're in Washington, when I'm in Washington, I want to be reminded that I stand to protect Texans and the Constitution of the United States. And so with that, I hope to get your support and answer any questions you might have this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Before we get started going around the table, I wanted to just clear up some of the background information here.
Mm-hmm.
When did you come out of UT?
I graduated at UT in 1987,
Okay, in George Washington.
1990.
Okay. And what type of law is your law firm specialized in?
I practice business immigration.
And when you work for the Department of Labor, what administration and under who was the?
I worked, the administration was the Bush administration, and I worked at the Wage and Hour Division.
That was W.
Mm-hmm.
And what, can you explain the church affiliation and participation level commentary there?
I was raised Catholic, and I attend activities in Assumption Church downtown.
Okay, is there any particular reference here towards
I-
Buddhist?
Yes, I practice Buddhism.
Okay. And, okay, so I guess my question is,
Mm-hmm.
US Senate,
Yes,
that's a pretty big lofty position.
yes.
A lot of Republicans genuflect when they hear the name John Cornyn.
Uh-huh.
Why are you running for this, and why did you think you can beat somebody of that name that's been in the Senate for so long? What value do you bring to the table for the voters?
Well, you're correct in that John Cornyn is like a staple name in Texas, but in the past 11 years, he's done anything but represent Texas in that he has voted to raise the debt ceiling 8 times. He's voted to extend the Patriot Act and our, I guess, break down our liberties by extending the NSA till 2017, and he has voted to increase the debt 200% in the 11 years he's been there. So when people don't really look at that, they just think John Cornyn from Texas, and that's it. So he's done very well in cloaking his ability to try to please all sides. And let me explain. When trying to pass a law, he'll vote yes in the committee to a particular law. When he gets to the floor, he'll vote no. So he pleases both sides. And Texans need to be aware of that. That is not standing on your principles. That is not protecting Texas. We really need to have someone that will protect Texans and the Constitution, and I don't feel that John Cornyn is conservative and principled enough to do that.
All right. So, as you're aware, as you pointed out, we're running a massive deficit. The debt is piling up. But it's $17 trillion, and you know it continues to increase. The economy is slowly recovering, as at least what we're told. So, how big of a problem is this? At what point does it become a bigger problem? What do we need to do, if anything, to prevent it becoming a problem?
Well, it is a problem in that it is taking over a lot of our ability to run our government. We are more concerned in ways, as conservatives, how to cut that deficit as opposed to how to run our government. That is not, that's not good politics. And we need to create a larger taxpayer base. We need more taxpayers initially. And we need to really be courageous enough to cut some of the spending that's out there, whether it be entitlements, and stop the process of grants. Stop giving the IRS greater power to overtake businesses, small businesses. Cut back the agencies like the Department of Labor that can go in and bankrupt a business rather than bring them into compliance. We have agencies growing at massive rates where our capitalist small businesses are growing smaller. Create more opportunity to cut down that deficit.
And so everything I heard you talk about there was on the spending side. Do we need to do anything on the tax side?
Yes, I think, one of the problems we have with the capital gains tax where, we don't invite people to do more investing. We don't invite families to have more savings because of the capital gains. And in a sense, people are, and perhaps it's a way for them to spend into the economy, but it creates a problem as our families and as we grow older because we don't have enough money to live off. And it makes us more dependent on the government. That is not capitalism.
Sure.
What, just to follow on his, you mentioned that we need more taxpayers, and I'm not sure if I heard you describe that. Could you describe that in a little bit more detail about what you mean?
We need to create more of an incentive for people and businesses to come into the United States. Number one, to create jobs, and number two, to invest into our tax system. Every time that a foreign company comes into the United States, it creates jobs, whether in manufacturing or investing in some area. So it creates the prosperity of hiring U.S. citizens, but at the same time paying into our tax trust as a business. So we get both spectrums.
Okay.
Okay, in one of your answers you mentioned about cutting entitlements, that because the current trend is unsustainable. That's question number 2. And I think a lot of people are, in general, in agreement with you. But they say the proof is in the pudding, or the devil is in the details. And so can you give us a little bit of details of how you would cut entitlements without cutting people's throats?
Sure, and that's a fair question. And I think that's something we're looking at in the Senate currently, where they want to cut back entitlements on welfare. But the Democrats want to extend it into 10 years so that no one is hurt in the 10-year process. Well, that's unrealistic. A lot can happen in 10 years because, we could see another downfall in our economy. We could have another war. So it's speculation. So in a sense, we need to cut if we want to emphasize on the welfare, we need to create it more of a job prosperity rather than welfare. And we need to make sure perhaps 36 months is not an unreasonable time frame, because the economy is improving for someone to be obtaining skills during that time and getting off welfare. So I think that's a big chunk that we have to work toward, and create families the ability to live off of creating either a business, but with a light at the end of the tunnel. It's not a perpetual state. Welfare was never meant to be a profession. It was just temporary until they could get on their feet.
And that sounds good. Most people, when you say entitlements, the first thing that pops into their mind is Social Security and Medicare.
Mhm.
Those are two things that are headed for insolvency, et cetera. Do you have any specific thoughts on those programs?
Well, we're living longer, and that is a wonderful thing. I often talk about my mother is 91. I want her to live forever. But at the same time, we have to be realistic about, we have an inverted triangle, if you would. We have an aging population with less taxpayers. So we need to increase our base of taxpayers in order to pay into that system of Medicare and other entitlements that will sustain all of us as we get older. And that was, earlier I mentioned creating more taxpayers. We have to allow companies to come invest in the United States to create jobs. Or we have to have the federal government get out of the way, allow more companies or entrepreneurs to be based in the United States by cutting the tax rate for companies to create more jobs for U.S. citizens.
Okay.
So back to your family, you're one of 10. Now, how many of those would be Republican, and how many of those would be Democrats?
Well, thank you for asking that. We got together for a family reunion, and I was pleasantly surprised that, some of my sisters who are educators, teachers, and they were more libertarian, they said, but certainly conservative. And of course, my father was a Republican when it wasn't cool in the Valley, and here he was taking us out to Barry Goldwater functions, and so he was ostracized down in the Valley. So he raised us to really be more conservative because of our finances. And so because of our professional success, most of my family are conservative Republicans.
And yeah, just to kind of follow up on that,
Mhm.
you made a couple of comments about Republicans and conservatives. So some people view those as being synonymous, and some not necessarily so. So do you view that as two synonymous things, or not necessarily?
Well, I think in Texas, we are when we say Republicans, we are fiscally conservative. But more and more people see it and gear it towards social issues. And they determine whether or not you're conservative enough based on your social issues. I'm still of the mind and philosophy that it's really how you see the economic prosperity in Texas or in the United States, because that's really where our party was founded, on fiscal responsibility.
So the last answer to Dale about, you made a comment about the government should let more people come in to create jobs, and then you said, or they should get out of the way to let companies create jobs. Do you have a preference on which way, or this both and? Do you see those as competing, or do you see those as not necessarily competing with each other?
Well, I see them competing only if we emphasize on the immigration aspect of allowing companies who can come in here. Because a company really can't come into the United States unless they're headed by someone, and in order to do that, they have to apply for an immigration status. So our immigration law is so broken that that's not even a possibility unless they bring $1 million or more money to invest in the United States, which really right now it's $1 million. I think it should be $5 million, because we have a lot of foreign people coming into the United States, and they have a plethora of wealth, and they come easily into the United States. But $5 million is not an unreasonable amount to come and invest. When we talk about American companies, there's such a bureaucracy in starting a company, through licensing, through taxes, through setting up franchise fees, especially here in Texas. We need to lessen that load for companies and give people more of an incentive to become entrepreneurs.
Okay.
Was very set back. You came from a family of 10, and each of you has graduated from college. What an accomplishment.
Thank
Well,
you.
your mother and dad did well.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, you went to University of Texas, and what made you go to the George Washington Law School?
Good question. I applied to a lot of other law schools, but I realized that I really wanted to emphasize on international law. For some reason that really at the time intrigued me, because I have two brothers who are also attorneys, and one of them was practicing international law. And I would go and help him at his office, and I became very intrigued. So when I applied to GW, they not only accepted me, they gave me a full scholarship, and I thought,
Wow.
that is a great university. It's 4 blocks from the White House. Not that I was going to be invited to the White House, but I thought, that's the center of international law. And so I attended GW on a full scholarship for that reason.
And so, the World Bank, were you working at the World Bank while you were going to college, or?
My first year, yes, I was interning at the World Bank at the International Finance Corporation, which is the private side of the World Bank. They have a public side where they give grants and they give money to countries all around the world. But the International Finance Corporation, they go into a country and directly invest in a company and create corporations and allow them to become solvent, and they don't have to go through the government where sometimes there's a lot of corruption going through the government process in itself. So
And then, when did you go to work for the Department of Labor?
I went to work for the Department of Labor in 2003 here in Houston.
Oh,
Not-
in Houston?
Here in Houston.
Oh.
And I applied for the Wage and Hour Division, and I was.
So that what brought you to Houston? That job?
No, I at the time, I was married to a perinatologist, and we lived in Birmingham, Alabama, then went to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and eventually I came to Houston.
And
stayed.
you mentioned earlier that you have a son,
I have 2 sons.
2 sons.
A 22-year-old at Rice, he's a senior at Rice University, and a 14-year-old.
Hopefully they're nice.
Well, he wants to go to UT, which is
All
a
right.
good, yeah, that's a good thing too.
And your mother's 91 years old.
My mother is 91 years old.
Does she live with you, or is she still?
No, she lives in San
Yes.
Antonio.
In San
and,
Antonio.
yeah, she is, she's still with us, very talkative, very spirited, and very stubborn. But I thank her for her tenacity,
Sure.
because if it weren't for her tenacity, I wouldn't be born today.
Huh.
When she was pregnant with me, one of her doctors told her to abort the pregnancy because she was 42 and I was going to be born retarded. And my mother, being tenacious, said, absolutely not. He said, well, then you'll die giving birth. She says, well, then I'll die giving birth. But not either of those things happened, and I'm here today. So I
Guess
have a
you-
lot to
guess you
thank
proved
her.
him wrong, didn't you?
Yeah, she sure did.
Good for her and good for you. In page 3, number 8, please explain your interpretation of separation of church and state
Mhm.
and list some actions you have taken that illustrate your positions. In there, I was kind of curious in your first comment that you said laws are created to help society,
Mhm.
and in order to do so, they must follow a moral compass.
Mhm.
Do you think laws were created to help society or to protect society?
I think initially laws were created to help society. I think that, in the beginning they were just codes of honor. And so in order to create order out of chaos, laws were created in order to bring about stability. I think, Adam Smith talks about the theory of moral sentiments, where he really believes, because of his spiritual nature, that man will act according to his moral compass, even when there's a man-made law. So that man-made law may just be a blueprint, but ultimately it's really one spirituality that guides him to obey that law and do the right thing. And I think we Americans tend to be a hybrid of that because of our religious affiliation and our faith. We look at man-made laws, but ultimately we always want to do the right thing. We get touched on our moral compass to be helpful to society, but to be helpful with each other. I give this example in Tyler, Texas. I traveled to go to a forum, our first debate, our senatorial debate. And I was so impressed with that town because when rough times hit that town, they organized themselves. And they found that the children were growing hungry, and only because they were going to school and they were hungry in the morning. And, you know, one of the children mentioned what is it that they were going to eat that evening. So the town got together, donated a piece of land. They had the inmates work the land. People from the church came and collected the food, prepared the food, went off to feed not only the children and the families, but the elderly. So they did that all amongst themselves without asking any government, state or federal, for help. That's the type of people we in Texas are. We help each other out, and no one told that town, you have to go and help each other out. It was just based on that moral compass belief that, you know, it's the law of man that, you know, when in need, you help each other out. That's just a Texan philosophy, I believe.
Do you think that man-made law is that it originated just, you know, with man, and that's where things evolve, you know, like the Constitution, that sort of thing? What's your idea of how America was made? You know, what was the evolution? Do you think it was just kind of man-made law that was created to help society in general?
Well, yes, as I think that it was to help society, but again, it really went on to look at the faith of all the founders. I think, you know, each one had a different type of faith, but they all wanted to, they had the sense of belief in God, they had their faith, but they really wanted to create something that was going to benefit in the long run, the foreseeability of the creation of something bigger than us, than them, and that was a respect to this moral compass of God.
Yeah. So do you know in the Constitution where it says where the separation of church and state is?
Well, you know, it was never made clear, but it's always to give the benefit. And now, when it mentions religion, it gives the permission almost, or the respect that no one will be discriminated based on their religion. It is just a matter of respect for every individual here. But the belief is that each one of us believes in God. Each one of us has that ability to tap into our faith, to do the right thing.
Okay.
All right. So in your answer to in solving the entitlements, you talked a little bit about Medicare and the ability to be able to control those costs some. And one of the things you mentioned was something along the lines of the
On question 18?
yeah. You mentioned that it's not 18 on mine. It's 16 on mine.
Okay.
Minnie says, as a result, Medicare should be based on means tested for high-income American, not be public funding. So how does that line up with conservative fiscal values? Isn't that a form of subsidy?
Well, you know, as we grow older, we also grow healthier. So, you know, Medicare was really intended to supplement or to help out the elderly or the population as it grew older. And so we thankfully have become more healthy because of medical innovation and better dietary responsibilities that we're taking and exercise. So it's you know, one of the things that I mentioned is raising the age from 65 to 68, which, you know, it's amazing. My family looks relatively young compared to, you know, what, they look better now than they did in their 30s, you know, and so it's, I guess, a sense of responsibility that I want all of us to have, that if we don't really need it because we've amassed this wealth, why should we take it? And I think it's just an honor code that I would like all of us as conservatives to really, we are a conservative group that we seldom show off our charitable behavior or, you know, our wealth. We are very giving. So in that aspect, if it helps the country and it doesn't hurt your pocketbook, why isn't that, you know, something that we should consider as conservatives? If we don't need it, give it back, or, you know, let's put it back into the system where it create more wealth for the country.
We got a few seconds left, but Medicare is a government agency.
Mhm.
And so what you're suggesting, it sounds like to me, I guess relative to following up Ken's question, is that perhaps it might be mandatory, you know, for higher income Americans to either forego that or to supplement that even more. Is that what you're suggesting?
Mandatory in that the government should tell us to? No, I think it's something that we as individuals have the right to decide whether or not we want to participate in it. I never have, I can't think of a law where I ever want the government to tell us, do this or else. We experienced that in Obamacare, where we are being told it's mandated to participate or face a fine. I don't think that's...
Is it Medicare mandated when you're working? You do have to contribute.
Well, you do have to contribute,
Uh,
but, you know, at some point, we need to make the decision to tell the government, you know, maybe we can refocus and redo Medicaid at some point, and Medicare at, you know, at the same time. We can't anticipate how long we're gonna live, but, you know, at the same time, I think as conservatives, we are savvy enough to know that at some point, we're gonna run out of money, or we're gonna take more than what we've put into the system. At some point, you know, our moral compass should be, you know what, I put into 2 to 1, and I'm taking 3 to 1, and it's certainly just not economically responsible to do that.
Okay. So,
Well, we're told consistently that we conservatives are cold-hearted, push granny over the cliff, want to pull the plug, and right on down the line. You have some very idealistic goals to the contrary. My question is that 47%, which seems to have eked over 50%, probably take great exception to your goals, your idealism. So how are you going to sell that?
Well, I don't hope to sell it. I hope to explain it in the process that we have to be responsible for all this debt. And part of the debt that we have created, we have to be realistic and be honest, was created by Medicare as well. So if we really want to tackle that $17 trillion, we have to make some changes. That I'm not saying that people shouldn't obtain that money that they paid into, but we have to make the changes in raising the age, or at some point foregoing some of the money that you didn't put into the system, or creating more taxpayers, as I said before. There has to be changes in there. And it's not that I want to sell it, it's just that I want to explain it so people can understand that it's a long-term effect that we all have to be responsible for.
Okay. I don't know if you've heard the audio of the person who called into the radio talk show and explained why folks like sit around this table are flat out stupid for working while they can sit at home and smoke pot and get all the food stamps, you know, right on down the line.
Mm-hmm.
You heard that audio clip?
No, I haven't.
Okay. It's I've heard it a couple of times. Different people have sent it to me, but
Sure.
the point is, there's a lot of people out there with that that philosophy,
Mhm.
so.
And there is, and you know, that's a generational thing, and we have to sit and think, did we create that, or where did that attitude come from? From a big government that we have allowed to be created. Again, we keep voting these people into office, and going to Washington DC, promising to make changes, but they don't. They just grow the government, they feed into that mentality of people like that, because all in all, are they really interested in protecting Texas? And voters like you and me, taxpayers like you and me? No, they're interested in their special interest group that's gonna fund their war chest, and we need to change that.
Okay.
So I'm confused a little bit. I'm not sure if I'm understanding you right. So are you saying you want to quit requiring people to pay for Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, and do it kind of on a voluntary basis, or to continue the taxes?
No, you know, if we're gonna continue the taxes, as I said before, we have to be realistic how much we're gonna put in, knowing now that our life expectancy is gonna grow.
Right. No, I understand that part,
So-
but are you saying that we should continue the taxation or not? We're gonna grow it or shrink it or dissolve it or what?
Well, we need to shrink it, we can't just dissolve it all at once, that would, you know, it has to be gradual.
Okay.
But at some point, we do need to eventually cut it back and stop it. I think that we should have a lot more control where that money goes. That's something that we don't have control of. That money sits there and the government gets to spend it, and they get to decide what programs, they get to decide, you know, what's gonna be flagged for grants and whatever, however they spend that money. So if we are, which I do believe we should stop it at some point, it should be gradual, but that money should be given back to that taxpayer to decide how to invest or where to spend it. Which means we're
Well,
gonna
the
have to.
money's already been spent.
Right.
All the tax money that I've ever paid in, it's not there.
Right.
It's not there. If they have to if I'm gonna get any of it, they're gonna have to tax it through somebody after.
Right, and we're gonna have to make some drastic cuts in spendings, which, you know, we have to look at all those programs that are out there. We have to look at a lot of the agencies in the United States, a lot of departments, and cut back on those agencies. Now, people are gonna say, but you're cutting into jobs. Well, yes, we're cutting into jobs, but we're probably giving them an opportunity to become entrepreneurs at the same time, with all the knowledge that they have gained while working in the government.
Explain a little bit more. I'm intrigued by you starting I think you called it the Latinos Ready to Vote. Is that the name?
Yes, sir.
And you started that in what? 2005?
I started in 2005, and the reasoning was I was volunteering a lot in churches to help people apply for U.S. citizen, to become U.S. citizens. And I did a little bit of homework and realized in Texas we have what's called legal permanent residents. Legal permanent residents are taxpayers, but they don't have the ability to vote. And so I wanted to create an incentive for them to be committed to the United States. Because as legal permanent residents, they can always leave the United States, stop paying taxes, never be loyal to this country. So if they had been here for a certain number of years, I thought, now you have the possibility of becoming a U.S. citizen. Texas has 1 million of these LPRs ready to become U.S. citizens. So I volunteered my services with churches and to go talk to these people to have them apply for U.S. citizenship. And in the process, I thought, we are creating new voters. Nothing is more conservative than a new voter, an immigrant coming from another country because they want that American dream. Rather than go and try to convert people, which really is what this outreach that everyone talks about, is they're trying to convert people. You have to sit and talk to them about conservative values. So immigrants who are ready to become U.S. citizens are, studies show, more conservative. So I go and volunteer, talk to them about conservative principles, talk to them about the Constitution and the American dream, and they become U.S. citizens in the process. So every year we have 100,000 more eligible to become U.S. citizens.
Very good. So, Did you find that most of the people that you talked to really thought they were Democrats? If they had to make a choice, they thought maybe they were Democrats, but really,
Yes,
by the values that they, most of them are Catholic, most have high family standards,
yes,
and that's totally
yes,
different
right,
than being a Democrat. So
Right.
I would think that would be very
absolutely.
refreshing.
And you know, and people think they are conservative because of their social issues. Not true. They are conservative because of their fiscal issues. The way that they look at finances, like we would here probably as conservatives, they do too. They believe in not buying more than they can afford. They believe in saving money. They believe in spending it within the family and you know, building that American dream. It was really nothing having to do with social issues.
Okay. In number 2, on page 2, we touched on cutting entitlements. I believe Dell did.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, you said we must focus on cutting entitlements and maybe even the bloated Pentagon budget. Where in the defense budget is it bloated and where would you cut?
Well, these particular wars now in Afghanistan and Iraq, I know that we were there initially perhaps to bring peace and to protect our interests because it was the Middle East. We had an interest in the oil, but now that is changing. We can bring that back to the United States, certainly keep people abroad to protect our interests, but not in the expansive way that we've had it. We need to start creating better relationships with countries that are our neighbors, Canada and Mexico and South America, where the oil corridor runs. And so that's going to bring prosperity, that's going to create jobs in America, that's going to create a better future for us. Here we are sending aid to countries like Egypt and Syria, where they like our money, but they hate our freedoms, and it doesn't make any sense to us to prolong that stay there.
Well, hadn't Egypt kind of turned things around where this supposed Arab Spring, which was not Arab and it wasn't spring,
Mm-hmm.
had flipped Egypt on its head,
Mm-hmm.
and it was really the Muslim Brotherhood that was
Correct.
taking over.
Right.
But it seems like the Egyptian people have spoken and taken the country back. Do you still see them as a friend or a foe,
Well,
based
you know,
on what you had just said?
now they're voting. They're currently voting on a new constitution, a new government where the Muslim Brotherhood can't participate. I think that's a start. But we can't continue to just go in there and give money to this country and give money to the government without really teaching them the principles of democracy, which is what I think they're doing now by allowing the people to come in and vote, not only for their president, but for their constitution, so that they have to take responsibility. We can't be in there always safeguarding their country. At some point, they have to run their country on their own, which means we have to pull back aid that we've provided in the process.
Okay, so we and after World War II,
Mhm.
in instituting the Marshall Plan, we actually turned Germany, a mortal enemy, into one of our biggest friends, and the same thing with Japan.
Mhm.
Do you not see that as being achievable with Iraq and Afghanistan?
Those countries turned around because of the economic prosperity that they achieved. They were, you know, it was sink or swim, especially in Japan, where they were allowed to be masters of their own innovative creativity to bring in prosperity. The same with Germany. Everything is so sufficient. It's probably the strongest economy in Europe right now. And so, but it also has to do with the culture. And I think that is something that we cannot intervene and change a country's culture if they don't desire it so. They have to be ultimately responsible for themselves.
We actually had to change both cultures in Japan.
They
and
changed it themselves,
Well,
ultimately.
There were a couple of nuclear bombs that took care of Japan and laid waste to Germany before they changed their attitude.
But they changed it. We, took perhaps that drastic measure, but in Germany as well, the atrocities that were created in Germany caused a harsh reality. And it was a country that was separated for many, many years that eventually had to find its way. And I think that's something in the Middle East that we have to look at. Ultimately, it comes to the responsibility of that particular country.
We've gone 30 minutes of no questions and answers.
Only 30? It's 5 till. I thought we started.
We started at 7:18.
Okay, so we got 5 minutes of questions?
Yeah.
Ken?
All right. So you talked a lot about NSA and security and all of this, being concerned about how much overreach government is doing. So what is right level? I mean, if we were attacked on 9/11, we don't really want to be attacked again. But on the other hand, we don't want the government in every aspect of our lives. So what is the appropriate level of security being provided? How do we achieve that?
That's a good question, because I'm not comfortable with the government secretly listening in on my conversations, or because I may be running for office, I'm, magnified at a higher level to see who I'm calling and such. That is not freedom. And so we need to be secure, certainly, but at some point this should have started at our borders, and I don't feel that it's necessary for the government to take all of our conversations and then decide at their whim which ones are going to defend the United States, which ones are not, without a proper warrant. And we cannot whittle away at the Fourth Amendment, because if we do, the First Amendment falls, the Second Amendment, and all the other ones. Those Bill of Rights, they're all made to work together. So what is the appropriate level? How about letting us know? First of all, listen, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. And I think as U.S. citizens, we're entitled to notice our due process, not being singled out as a traitor to the United States because we may have talked to someone or done business with someone in Abu Dhabi or some foreign country, which we have every right to do as entrepreneurs, business people.
Okay, on somewhat of a different tack, you said you were interested in some international law and things of that nature. And question number 6, you said U.S. must stay engaged in the Middle East. And you said we must also stay engaged to aid Israel. Stay engaged is in the eye of the beholder. Could you be a little bit more specific as to what you mean by stay engaged? How, what actions stay engaged, and what is your real perspective on the relationship between America and Israel?
I am very pro-Israel, of course, and I think that they have been a good ally and friend to the United States. When I say stay engaged, I mean be aware of things that are happening in that area, not necessarily just pull out of that area with our troops or our aid and say, adios, you're on your own, but rather do it gradually and not with a vindictive nature. When I say engaged also, we have to be aware globally of where the United States stands with certain countries in the Middle East, in the Far East, South America. So we have to stay engaged by providing embassies there, because we still do business there. We still have U.S. citizens who have families there. So providing embassies there is not something unheard of. In addition, I know that some universities have campuses there. So staying engaged in that way, but I don't think that we should continue to provide billions of dollars in aid to countries who seemingly do not like the United States. That to me is contradicting our own interest. And so we need to bring that money and create more value in the United States, create more prosperity in the United States, rather than engaging in that type of tactic in the Middle East. That is what I mean by engaged.
Okay, so specifically non-militarily is what I'm hearing you say.
Non-militarily.
So in question number 11, it talked about parental rights and the federal government's role and such, and you basically said healthcare. Oops, I'm sorry, wrong question number.
Not on 11?
14, sorry about that. And you said that the government should not have the right over a child, however, when the welfare of the child, under the state law and discretion, a state agency should have authority with evidence to protect the child from danger. So, what is your overall view of child protective services? Are they generally a good thing? Because you hear good stories and bad stories, and you've got experience probably through your law practice and engagement with the public. So, is that generally a good thing, a bad thing, and how do is it better to err on which way should we err on that side of that argument?
Well, certainly we should always look to the best interest of the child, because, they're defenseless in as much as, two cases come to mind. I think I talked about Tyler, Texas. When that child was coming to school hungry, they didn't call Child Protective Services. They united as a community to solve the problem. It's not that they were accusing the parents of anything. They recognized there was a problem in feeding children because of the economy, and there was a problem there to be solved. So we have to understand that not all parents are intentionally hurting their children. It's just sometimes based on outside sources that affect the family. That's one instance where I think had they called Child Protective Services, it would have been an overreach of their duties and responsibilities. How many families would have been affected? That would have been a disaster. There's another case currently going on in Dallas where there is a woman who is pregnant and suffered an aneurysm. And she's currently in a coma, and the husband wants to disconnect her, but under Texas law, because she's pregnant, that's not allowed. So the law, in a sense, is coming in to protect the life of the child, which I think is the appropriate means to do. Had she not been pregnant, then I think the father would have every right to disconnect her because that's his wife